Yo, what's up? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to another episode of Substances Explained. Today we're covering a very odd over-the-counter substance. It's often described as a deliriant. That's a hallucinogen with very realistic and undesirable effects, defined by a state of delirium. But unlike most other deliriants, it's described as stimulating on top of this, with light psychedelic hallucinations and possibly effects that mimic cannabinoids. I'm talking about the over-the-counter substance benzydamine, otherwise known as tantum rosa, tantum verde, diflam, or possibly some other brand name. It's a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, which if you don't know what that is, think of something like ibuprofen or Advil. It's pretty much a painkiller and inflammation reducer, which as of making this video, there's no other known deliriants or stimulants for that matter that have the purpose of an anti-inflammatory. So here we are to break this down and really get an understanding of the complexity going on with this substance, and how it's one of the most unique hallucinogenic over-the-counters. We'll dive into the history, the chemistry, the pharmacology, which will include a lot of theories today, what effects to expect, dosages, the culture about it, and anything that's relevant about benzydamine. And joining me today for another collab is the homie Low Key Fish. Fish makes similar concept breaking down substances and explaining those states.
Yo, what is good? My name is Low-Key Fish, and I'm here with someone that's known to give you a full breakdown of the drug known as benzydamine. This is a substance that is classified as an NSAID, which stands for non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. Other popular drugs that are also in this class that you've probably done yourself include ibuprofen, aspirin, and naproxen to say the least. Benzydamine is an unorthodox high that is slightly stimulating and is accompanied by bizarre hallucinations with a stoning headspace reminiscent of cannabis. It's typically used to treat ulcers and sore throats, but you can use it recreationally at higher doses to induce a state of mind-bending alterations of reality. We're going to cover anything you'd want to know, including history, effects, pharmacology, dangers, the culture behind it, and everything else in between. Let's get into it.
I highly recommend you check his stuff out and subscribe if you enjoy the content here. And if you don't know, these explain videos are kind of like sibling videos of past reports we've read, which we've read a handful of benzydamine reports now, but the reports I want to tie this video with and reference are The Most Poetic Drug by Hoffman, where he took 3 packs of tantum rosa, or 450 milligrams, and the report Peering into Hell by Nico P2, where they took 2,000 milligrams of benzydamine and also had an energy drink. Both these reports show how strong you can hallucinate, but the latter shows just how extreme the delirium can get and how uncomfortable the state can be physically. The Peering into Hell report is easily one of the most wildest reports we've had on this channel. But I'm happy to be dropping another episode of this, and I'm sure you guys are too. So without further ado, let's dive right into this. Alright, so let's start off with the history and the chemistry of it. With the history, there's very little out there regarding its invention, but it was first submitted to be patented in 1964 by Giuseppe Palazzo in Italy, along with a set of other indisols, something like 48 total. Presumably work started back in the late 1950s to find a new class of anti-inflammatory agents. The patent was submitted under the company what is now known as Angelini, a pharmaceutical company in Italy. Angelini was also responsible for developing the antidepressant trazodone, but shortly after the patent was approved, it quickly found usage as an anti-inflammatory based off the research that was presented, under the brand name of tantum verde, which, touching on the language a little bit, it is Latin and it translates to only green. I'm guessing in theory, you make inflammation and pain go away, and you're in a green state, something like that. Then the other common brand, tantum rosa, that is a product used for vaginal douching. That translates to only a rose, which I'll let you figure that one out. But besides that, this is all the early history with benzydamine, outside of the scientific data and its eventual abuse. But this would take decades before any began. There really isn't a lot of specific information with it outside of the chemistry and original pharmacology regarding its effects as an anti-inflammatory, which no one would really assume that benzydamine would act in such a way. Like I said, this is the only non-steroidal anti-inflammatory I believe that could cause hallucinations or recreational effects, besides something really odd like pravidolene, which does have some cannabinoid activity. It wasn't until around the 90s or so did reports of usage and abuse start to pop up. So now, let's take a look at the chemistry, then the pharmacology research thus far. which I had to say doesn't reveal a ton as to why it can cause all these different effects. So after that, we're going to get into some predictions and theories as to why it can act this way. I made a post about this and also reached out to a good amount of you in the community to help me out with this, because I do have to admit, this is probably the most complex substance I've had to try and break down. A big part of it is because there is so much limited research on it, but also because benzydamine is just so damn weird. In terms of complexity, we can probably compare this to something like ibogaine, the powerful dissociative psychedelic that can help eliminate opiate and substance dependence. When a substance has multiple effects like this, it's bound to be a complex substance with varied activity going on. So I just want to make that clear. I'm going to try my best to explain why and how certain effects are happening, but the reality is, it is theorized and we just don't know 100% until the actual research is carried out. But with that being said, let's talk about some of the chemistry. So going by the chemical name of 3,1-benzolindazole, 3-wiloxy, NN-dimethylpropane, 1-amine, it belongs to the indazole chemical class. This class is defined by the fusion of a benzene and pyrazole ring. When fused together, they form the bicyclic indazole. But with that, let's go over some of the research established and what we do know with benzydamine. So if I didn't already make it clear, it is effective against certain types of inflammation and pain, especially when aiming for a localized area. But even at this level, compared to other non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, benzydamine stands out among them as it acts a bit differently. One thing that stands out that's most likely contributing to the anti-inflammatory effect is that benzydamine will inhibit prostaglandin synthesis, which if you don't have a clue what prostaglandins are, to keep it simple, they're lipids our body produces that play a few functions. A couple of those functions include inflammation and pain. So a reduction of this should help ease those symptoms better. And fever reduction will be another effect. Besides this, the research early on did indicate that there is an antimicrobial effect. That's protection against endotoxins and also protection against cytotoxins. Which, if you take a look at some of the data here, this is pretty significant and it does indicate it can be an effective option for some conditions. It is noted that it will target some forms of bacteria, and it may do so better than some of the antibiotics in place. It'll depend though, and more research is needed to really clarify just how effective this really is and how it works specifically. This is what gave way to tantum rosa being improved. Just another effect of benzydamine that makes it stand out and adds to the complexity. But let's take a step away from the standard medical research and get into the pharmacological activity responsible for the effects brought up on higher doses. Which I'm going to do things a little backwards today and list the main effects you can expect here with benzydamine, just so you have somewhat of an idea how and why the effects and activity align. But beyond it acting as an anti-inflammatory and antibiotic, especially when you start getting into higher doses, you can expect a variety of effects which can include physical and mental stimulation, double vision, tracers, a feeling of inebriation, full-on delirium like shadow people, insects, and other horrors, confusion, time distortion, motor loss control, increased heart rate, euphoria, dysphoria, insomnia, tiredness, psychosis, dehydration, anxiety, abnormal heartbeat, and much more. That isn't everything, but a good handful, at least reported subjectively. But like I said, the research is limited, but at the very least, we can most likely assume that there is cannabinoid activity going on with this study right here. In this study, cannabinoid antagonists were used at the same time as benzydamine, and the results showed a decrease in benzydamine's effects, suggesting that benzydamine could be a cannabinoid agonist. How much and in which way is still undetermined, but at the very least, this suggests where some of these recreational and hallucinogenic effects may be coming from. Which, to compare benzydamine to cannabinoids, a lot of synthetic cannabinoids that were used in spice are indazoles, and we can spot some structural similarities, especially with, sorry if I get this wrong, AB-fubanica, or another example being THJ-2201. So because of these things, I think it's highly likely there is some cannabinoid activity, which, seeing how spice trips can go, I can definitely see how some of the hallucinogenic effects may correlate. But also from this study, they did find that benzydamine exhibits cross-sensitization with hard drugs, specifically cocaine and heroin. What this means is that benzydamine is able to provide a stimulus to the brain comparable to those hard drugs, which this is related to the reward system and forms a psychological dependency. This gives us an idea of how strong the effect can be. Besides this, there is a small amount of research suggesting anticholinergic activity, which is considered the main activity of your standard delirium. There really isn't much to cover here though, besides a reference that was made in this book on drugs covering 10,000 different substances back in 2002. It references the companies 3M Pharmaceuticals and Angelini, but all it states is that it's an anticholinergic. There isn't any actual data showing how this activity was concluded, but we can possibly assume that it was something that came up along with their findings, but they didn't pursue the research in this direction. So there's that, and that's where we hit the end of the road concerning published research. So to recap quickly what's been researched, benzydamine is an odd-acting anti-inflammatory substance with most likely cannabinoid activity and possibly anticholinergic activity. This can help explain some of the experience, but not all of it. The hallucinogenic effects that can pop up have been compared with psychedelics at times, with there being tracers, vibrant colors, and more, which I can potentially see cannabinoid activity being responsible for this, but then people commonly report that there is stimulation, which I don't think cannabinoid or anticholinergic effects would cause this, nor would its anti-inflammatory. And it is reported to be pretty strong, while compared this to other deliriants, they most of the time have a depressant-like effect. So now, entering the land of theoretics, so we can try and understand what could be going on. First, I want to present some base ideas and predictions, starting one with this table, which this is a theory table created by someone on the benzydamine subreddit, with its metabolites, which is a whole other side to consider. Outside of the anticholinergic activity, this is a fair base prediction to try and line things up with the effects. The norepinephrine and dopamine activity could be tied to the stimulation, while serotonin, cannabinoid, and metabotropic glutamate receptors can be tied to the hallucinatory effects, and the rest to the anti-inflammatory most likely. Which we haven't taught much about the metabotropic glutamate receptors, but they are involved with the effects of delirium tremens, also potentially with 5-HT receptors. But again, this table is theoretical. Then I do want to make a mention to the site Swiss Target Prediction, which I have to say, it doesn't add a ton of value I feel like, probably because benzydamine is so complex, but we can spot the predicted mechanisms. But that brings us now to subjectivity and prediction. Subjectively, there's little out there besides the reports, but some do claim that there may be stages to the experience, it being more enjoyable and cannabinoid-like on the come up, while on the come down, it represents more of a delirium and psychosis, with the stimulation being prominent throughout, which I would suspect the metabolites themselves could be playing a role with this, or possibly it could be the impurities, as they are comparable to acetylcholine. There could even be dissociative effects going on, but we won't get into that today. But it's debatable what contributes to what and how much, especially concerning the hallucinations, since just about all this activity could be responsible. Strong cannabinoid agonism has shown to lead to psychotic states, anticholinergics and delirium speak for themselves, psychedelic activity also speaks for itself, which I imagine probably amplifies the discomforting effects, and then however the stimulation is being presented, insomnia and stimulus psychosis are very possible. Some have claimed schizophrenic hallucinations are comparable, which that's marked by a dopamine dysfunction. Again, this is what is subjectively reported and thought from the users of it, and it isn't all of it, but what's most commonly predicted. But now let's get back into the chemistry and look at the theoretics there. To start, let's look at one common comparison that often gets brought up, and that's with serotonin itself. Comparably, serotonin is an indole, which benzydamine's indazole ring is the exact same except a carbon is swapped for a nitrogen. So it's easy to see the similarity here. Connected to this nitrogen though is a benzyl group, which with this bulky attachment, it most likely lessens the serotonergic impact. And along with some other structural reasons, it's most likely not fueled by this activity alone, at least with the standard psychedelic 5-HT2A. So we're going to bring up another class of compounds to compare, which will strengthen the argument here that there is some kind of serotonin activity at play. The The class being compared is one called N-aerosulfonyl 3-amino alkoxy-indoles. Comparably, this class has an indole ring and a sulfonyl bridge instead of a methylene. Because methylene and sulfonyl had the same tetrahedral geometry, it's predictable benzydamine could retain some of this pharmacology. Which, if we look at the pattern of this chemical class, they agonize 5-HT1A and melatonin receptors. So even if benzydamine is a much weaker ligand compared with these compounds, I imagine the higher doses people take could deem this activity relevant. Also, another comparison to somewhat support the lack of 5-HT2A activity is the anticholinergic class itself, as most anticholinergics are 5-HT2A antagonist. But moving on, since we're on anticholinergics, let's explore this possibility. We do have one study to suggest it is happening, but here's a very detailed prediction and comparison using Schrödinger's maestro. If you never heard of this tool, to put it simply, it's an advanced tool for molecular modeling, allowing an easy interface to work with 3D molecular models for simulation purposes, giving us a prediction for how benzydamine may be acting on this level. I'll just say now, this went very well concerning the anticholinergic potential, and the cannabinoids somewhat well, but the muscarinic site got the best results. To really get an idea of this, we compared docking scores on this site with two other anticholinergics, one being Benadryl, which I'm sure most of you know of, and then the other being tiotropium. We can see the values are very close on the initial docking score in the green, but also its refined score after being released in the red. Theoretically, its anticholinergic effect may be on par with diphenhydramine. The amino acid interactions also seem to match up well. Then if we just take a look at the chemical structures, we can spot the rings and nitrogen lining up. And you can make some more comparisons, but even with all this, it is hypothetical, to the best of our ability. But moving on, we won't bring up cannabinoid activity again since we already made some comparisons, and there's at least that one study to reference. So what about the stimulation? This may be one of the hardest to explain because we have pretty much no leads to go off of, besides people reporting that it's stimulating, with some claiming they think it to be norepinephrine activity. Well, we can bring up a comparison here, and that is atomoxetine. Atomoxetine is a norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, and when we compare the structures here, we can see that it has the same aryloxy propylamine side chain, and there is a sort of similarity between them. It is very little to go off of, and many do claim that it is a dirty stimulant feeling, but this could be due to the mix of activity going on with it. But this is one of the best theories I think for its stimulating effects, without making a huge stretch. But yeah, that's pretty much that with what we think the activity most likely is at this time, based on all the research present, the subjective reports out there, and theories brought up to me by these lovely people. Again, very complex substance for just being an over-the-counter anti-inflammatory at the start. But we're going to briefly go into the pharmacodynamics just a little, then set up Fish to talk about the dangers. Because with all this activity, it can be quite the risk and dirty at high doses. But just briefly, I want to mention mainly the half-life and whatnot, as it actually can be quite long, especially for some metabolites. The half-life for benzydamine is 13 hours when taken orally, and the metabolite benzydamine N-oxide even longer, which explains why the trips can be so long lasting. Usually it will take a couple hours or so to fully kick in. But that's about it concerning the pharmacology. Now, Low-Key Fish is going to talk about the dangers and toxicity of it, and after, we'll wrap things up with how it's entered some cultures in the past and where it is today. So take it away, Fish.
Yo, what's up homies? My name is Fish and let's get right into the dangers and toxicity of benzydamine. Despite being categorized as an NSAID, benzydamine demonstrates various mechanisms of action that differ from those of traditional ibuprofen or aspirin-like effects. Available predominantly as a liquid mouthwash, nasal spray, or topical cream, benzydamine is most frequently employed as an anti-inflammatory treatment for the relief of painful inflammatory conditions. But at higher doses, it is known that benzydamine can be abused due to its hallucinogenic effects at doses over 500 milligrams. An overdose is technically considered considered 300 to 500 milligrams because this is when you get into the recreational side of things. Typically, people take 1 to 3 grams to get high, and this is when you can get into pretty insane delirious territory. The high is intriguing because it can feel psychedelic while also feel stimulating, plus induce a state of deliriousness and have cannabis-like effects. That being said, it has powerful reinforcing effect and has cross-sensitization with drugs of abuse such as heroin and cocaine in animals. It's even hypothesized that it can act on cannabinoid receptors in the brain, which is why it makes some of the effects feel as if you were smoking weed. The most intoxicating effects are the crazy visuals and a wacky headspace, but other side effects include swelling of the throat and mouth or difficulty swallowing, speaking, and breathing.
I can't breathe!
Bruh. At massive doses, you could die from seizures or a heart attack. Furthermore, you could suffer from kidney or liver failure if you don't filter it and ingest too much salt. Some users even have reported to have effects lasting for the rest of their lives because they got HPPD or PTSD from the trip. The toxicity and long-term health effects of recreational benzydamine has not yet been studied in any scientific context, and the exact toxic dose is unknown. This is because benzydamine is a research chemical with very little history of human usage. In conclusion, benzydamine is relatively safe at low doses for treating inflammation, but at extreme doses, it can create some insane altered perceptions of reality. So I hope this is informative and can spread awareness about harm reduction of this drug. Anyway, my name is Fish and I stay low key, and here's someone that's known to finish things off regarding the culture of benzydamine.
Okay, and to wrap things up with some of the culture here. There has been somewhat of a scene for benzydamine in some specific countries. One country that has been studied includes Brazil. The numbers are small, but do seem significant, suggesting it may have been experimented with at the very least. I even found this song back in 2005 called Ode to My Pills, Ben Floggin by Montage, a Brazilian music group. Given that benzydamine can be a strong hallucinogenic, that it can produce euphoria at times, that it gives stimulation, I wouldn't be surprised if it somewhat found its way into the club scene. It was also reported that the substance would commonly be used with alcoholic beverages, which I'm sure just made things that much more dangerous. But besides this, there are specific case reports from places like Poland, Italy, Russia, and some others. You can also go to some old forums and threads on places like Hyperreal or Neurogroove and find a handful of old benzydamine reports from the early 2000s, suggesting there may have been a scene in Poland with it as well. Besides that, there really hasn't been too much outside of what is currently going on, or what's been going on for about a decade now, especially on places like Reddit, which I believe I mentioned there is a subreddit, but it isn't like it's a very active community, or one that's preaching about how benzydamine is so great. It can be a hellish experience, discomforting, and an overall mess of effects even for the most experienced user. So it's no surprise that this isn't a substance that's beaming. But it is one damn interesting one, that's for sure. It gave one of the most powerful reports we've read yet, and I'm sure there's many others demonstrating just how strong of a hallucinogenic it can be. It's why I had to bring it on for this video here, so we can all get a better idea of what this substance is. I'm sure as time goes along, we'll understand it even more. But we're going to end things there for today. I hope you enjoyed this in-depth breakdown and analysis on benzydamine. We definitely had a more scientific take for this video, so give a like if you enjoyed and subscribe for more. But it's been Someone That's Someone, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.
Yo, thanks for watching this video, and we really hope you enjoyed hearing about the wackiness of benzydamine. Be sure to subscribe to Someone That's Known by clicking right here because he makes great videos about trip reports and breakdowns of substances. And if you want to check out my videos, click here to subscribe to my channel. But just so you know, we stay a little low-key on my profile. Anyway, sending good vibes to all of you. Much love. Peace out.